Bible Worm, reading the Bible with Bible Worm.
Welcome to Bible Worm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning and Music at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia.
And I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, Professor of Religious Studies at Hendrix College and Theologian in Residence of Canvas Community in Little Rock, Arkansas. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish and one Christian.
Our reading today is John chapter 4, verses 46 through 54, and chapter 5, verses 1 through 18. The first healing stories we'll read this season. And in this time when access to healthcare seems like its own miracle, they're stories that really struck us both. We remember the signs and wonders of Exodus and their importance in building a lasting faith for the people, just as we see Jesus offering signs and wonders of a different kind. We try to imagine what it would be like to be so close to that pool of water that held within it a promise of dignity or maybe even healing, and then to slowly realize over weeks and years that it may never be your turn to immerse. When Jesus heals these men, can we imagine he's offering something more than a broken fever, more than legs with the strength to walk? And can we imagine a way of healing in this story and in our time that's not dependent on the established systems? Thanks for being with us. Hey, Bobby, it is good to see you.
Hey, Amy, it's good to see you too.
The world's a little crazy right now, and your family has been sick on and off. You're passing things around, aren't you?
Yeah, my family was sick for the better part of 2 weeks. This flu that's been going around, I guess it is. One of us tested positive for the flu, and then the others just followed suit. And it was a good 2 weeks of being off my game. So I'm just kind of re-emerging into the world. Yeah. How have y'all been?
We've been okay. And I've been worrying about your sick family from several states away. It is a wild thing I shouldn't say just the flu because it can be very serious, but I don't know. I just have been thinking a lot about what it is to sort of go from being healthy to being sick and then to being healthy again. I mean, this will tie into our readings today, but it also is true outside of the, you kind of forget what it's like to not be able to just feel okay in your body. And I start to take that for granted sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. And we're also living in a time in which the access to healthcare is, my family is quite blessed in this way, but there are many families, as you well know, that don't have access to healthcare, and maybe that access to healthcare is going to get cut even further. And so thinking about not just health and wellness, but also the systems that support health or don't has also been on my mind.
Yeah, so today we are reading from the book of John, chapter 4, verse 46 through chapter 5, verse 18, which are healing stories. And every year I raise some concerns about, we always talk about sort of the challenges of healing stories, namely not everybody gets healed in the world. And so how does a person who really needs really needs healing receive these stories? And so to read them at a time that even the kind of healing that we can do in our world on our plane with medical knowledge is not available to everyone. I don't know, all those things feel more relevant than I would like them to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do struggle with healing stories, as we've talked about a number of times on the podcast, for exactly the reasons that you're saying. And also one of the ways that I have come to read them is, I am not a miracle worker and I'm not a healthcare provider, but to think about, when you encounter in these stories people who do need healing and they turn out to need Jesus to heal them, then one way of approaching that is to say, well, I'm not Jesus, but maybe I can occupy somehow that place in the story to identify people in need and figure out ways to use the resources I do have. And
Yes.
so then it feels a little less hopeless to me than just we're all waiting on a
Yes.
miracle and some of us get it and some of us don't.
Yes.
So that's how I've been kind of thinking this week.
I love that. I think that's a much more alive way for me to encounter these texts. Well, should we read some texts?
Let's read some texts.
Let's read some texts. Okay. So I am beginning in John chapter 4, verse 46, and I'm reading from the NRSV. Then he came again to Cana in Galilee, where he had changed the water into wine. Now there was a royal official whose son lay ill in Capernaum. When he heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went and begged him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. Then Jesus said to him, "Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe." The official said to him, "Sir, come down before my little boy dies." Jesus said to him, "Go, your son will live." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and started on his way. As he was going down, his slaves met him and told him that his child was alive. So he asked them the hour when he began to recover, and they said to him, "Yesterday at 1 p.m, the fever left him." The father realized that this was the hour when Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." So he himself believed, along with his whole household. Now this was the second sign that Jesus did after coming from Judea to Galilee. Bobby, I was a little surprised at the beginning of this story that Jesus is known in this way in Cana. Like, yes, he had already done this sort of water into wine thing, but that was like really on the down low.
It was, yeah.
And he goes back to the city and a man hears that he had come and begs him to heal his son who is close to death. Like, he's got a reputation.
He does have a reputation. And so it kind of makes you wonder if Jesus has been doing some other kinds of signs and miracles that haven't been narrated, although John is very explicit here in saying this was the second sign that he did in Cana. And so somehow his reputation has gotten out there. Maybe the stewards from the wedding have been talking. Maybe the disciples have been, although I guess the disciples have been in Judea and Samaria with Jesus. So I don't know.
Somehow the word's getting around.
The word is out there somehow.
So Jesus says to this man, unless you people, like that's the plural, like unless y'all see these signs and wonders, you will not believe. And I just wonder, Bobby, like, what do you read into that statement? I wouldn't disagree with what Jesus is saying, that like miracles really awaken a different kind of possibility for belief in people. But I'm just trying to picture if you were the guy whose son was about to die and that's what Jesus said to you, I feel like they're talking past each other. Like they both have their like agenda.
Yeah.
And they find this little place of like commonality or overlap, like what's going to work for both of us. But they come to it with different, I don't know, it seems like different motivations is maybe a weird word.
Yeah, that little verse causes a lot of consternation amongst interpreters for exactly the reason that, I mean, this man says he's a royal official. We don't know exactly what that means, but maybe he is in the retinue of Herod, or maybe he is part of the Roman imperial structure. We don't quite know, but he's a person of some importance. And so he's kind of, I think, probably accustomed to people sort of responding to him in a certain kind of way. And he's come and he is begging Jesus to heal him. And Jesus, you're right. I mean, it's a little bit of a like, hang on a sec. Like, you know, it reminds me of when Jesus's mother asks him in that wedding at Cana text, like, hey, they're out of wine. And Jesus says, woman, what's that got to do with me? You know?
Yeah.
There's a little bit of, and then he goes on to do it, which is also what happens here.
Yes.
And so there's this sort of like Jesus has this habit of taking a beat and then doing the thing anyway. What you notice there about the plural, I think that's really important. Jesus says, unless y'all see miraculous signs and wonders, y'all won't believe.
Mhm.
And if you're that royal official, you're like, wait, you're like looking around, like, who are you talking about? Jesus, it's just me. And so, I mean, this seems to be a place where Jesus maybe is talking past the narrative to you and me and all of the readers of John, as he was back in the story of Nicodemus in, I think it was 3:11, where he says, we tell y'all about the things we have seen. And so, I think we are supposed to sort of hear ourselves, like, you, Williamson, unless you hear signs and wonders, you're not going to believe.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that interaction?
I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. I almost picture Jesus saying that line sort of like under his breath, like,
oh yeah,
like kind of rolling his eyes, like, oh my God, you people, like, And then this is a sure sign that I don't know, have teenagers or watch too many YouTube videos or something. But when the royal official says, sir, in my translation, like this sort of like redirect, like focus, pay attention here. It sounds to me like, sir, this is a Wendy's. Like, sir, the task at hand is the healing of my son. Whatever conversation you're having in your head about signs and wonders, that can wait.
Focus, Jesus. Yes.
Yeah, like my son's about to die. Yeah. So
I love that. This is a Wendy's. Yeah.
Let's get on it.
Amy, that language of miraculous signs and wonders in the Greek here is the same as in the Greek in the plague narratives in Exodus 7 to 12 or wherever that is.
Yeah.
Where God's going to do miraculous signs and wonders so that you can see and tell your children and their children.
Yes.
And so John maybe is connecting these, the signs and wonders in John's gospel maybe are supposed to function in some way like the signs and wonders in Exodus.
I love that. I love that connection because in Exodus, like it's really not just to impress Pharaoh.
Right.
It's to impress, like make a really deep memory impression on the Israelites so that they will tell this story.
Yeah. When you think about it that way, and Jesus says y'all, and so you can kind of hear those, like this is not just to impress Pharaoh. It's not just to impress this royal official. It's to impress us so that we can believe and we can tell others this story.
People work. Yeah. I know in the early biblical stories and in the Hebrew Bible, I know we've talked about how it sometimes seems like God is getting to know what it is people need in order to be able to do what God needs them to do. This isn't exactly like that because it seems like Jesus already knows, but is sort of like reciting for himself this fact.
Yeah.
And then Jesus heals him, but sort of in the most distanced way. I don't know. What do you make of that? Why doesn't Jesus go with him? Why? I don't know. It feels a little like, I don't know if it feels sort of impersonal or like a little harder to trace how the healing happened, or how do you think about that?
It's so interesting, Amy, because, the other miracle at Cana, which was the water into wine, also kind of happened like that. Remember where the water was put into the containers and they dipped it out, and when they tasted it, it was wine.
Yeah.
But there was never a moment where you're like, presto magico.
That's right. Ta-da!
Yeah.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And so this is like that. Like, okay, the son's going to live, but we never saw Jesus do anything or say anything. It just like the plot of the story has changed because Jesus says that it has.
Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting to me is then later on, you're going to get the confirmation from the community. And so it brings in an element here of in order for you to know that a miracle has actually happened, you have to have the testimony from the people who were back at home with the kid. Mm-hmm. So it's not till the end of the story where you're like, oh, it happened at that moment. Up until then, I guess you could just be like, yeah, he's going to be fine. Like don't worry about it. But now once you hear from them, like at the time Jesus said it, a miraculous thing occurred.
Yeah.
But nobody on either end of that knew that those things were connected for sure until they tell their testimony to each other.
I love that sort of like communal piece of it that you're seeing there.
Yeah.
I was thinking maybe along similar lines, but I didn't get all the way there, that it asks a little more of the man to put the pieces together. Like the man could have just gone back and heard that his son was healed and let it go.
Yeah.
Like his son is healed. He got what he wanted. Either Jesus did it or he did it himself. But like if the most important thing was the healing of the son, that has happened.
Yeah.
But he goes the extra step to try to put it together. And that kind of investment in figuring it out, I do think has something to do with our belief.
Yeah.
In the sort of like come and see way. Like not I'm going to show you everything. Like you have to, I don't know, you have a little more skin in the game.
I really like that, Amy. You know, one of the things that's so funny to me in this text is Jesus says, unless you see, you won't believe. And then he says, go home. And then it says the man believed in verse 50. So the man does believe before he actually sees anything. And so, so the belief has already happened. But what you're saying about he digs through, he keeps following the thread, he talks to the community. What happens then is in verse 53, he and his entire household believed in Jesus. So it's like this communal connection that you're seeing deepens his own belief and also spreads it to other people in his household. And so the initial belief is not the end of that story. It's the beginning of a communal thing that carries on past itself.
That's really interesting. That's making me think back to the story earlier in the chapter when Jesus is talking to the Samaritan woman and she goes back to her community and says, like, could it be that, like, I don't know, but maybe it is.
Yes.
Like maybe this is like the Messiah.
Yeah.
That you have that the beginning of a belief, like the door is open.
Yeah.
And at that moment, you invite more people into it with you.
I love that connection, Amy. I mean, one of the things that's shaping up in John's gospel is some people believed at the wedding in Cana. The Samaritan woman, as you're pointing out, believed and shared with her community in Samaria. Now we're back in Cana. The royal official believes, and then his household comes to believe. In the meantime, Jesus was down in Judea, in Jerusalem, with the muckety-mucks. And they didn't believe at the temple. They were upset with him in the temple. And then Nicodemus was trying real hard to get there. And maybe he does by the end of the gospel, but he couldn't get there. And so we've got some kind of like belief is happening in Samaria and Galilee. It is a real struggle in the center of the power structure. Maybe?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I was thinking, I don't know if this is a complete memory, but Nicodemus seeks out Jesus and sort of has a question, but Jesus doesn't like do a thing for him.
That's true.
The way
he explains some stuff to him.
He explains, he says some stuff. He explains some things, but in these, it's kind of a whole different kind of story.
That might be fair. That is probably fair to Nicodemus. Like Nicodemus says is something like, we know that you are from God because nobody could do these things you're doing unless they were from God. But then he can't close that thought quite yet. But you're right. He doesn't get the same kind of.
He doesn't have the same immediacy. Like he has heard about it, but he hasn't been pushed past his rational belief system yet.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
It just made me laugh here that the fever left him yesterday at 1:00 in the afternoon. You've got me paying attention to how specific the times can be.
I love that. I love it. And it is like, did they have watches? Like,
yeah.
I don't know. What
sundials, I guess, maybe.
Timepieces did we have then? No, it is, that stood out to me also. Not just, it's very specific.
It was right after lunch. Maybe that's what they mean. It was right after lunch. Yeah.
I just want to note here at the sort of stating the obvious, this is a really different like scale of miracle that we're talking about here. Like turning water into wine, we sort of talked about how that's a really like low key, like, hospitality is good and important.
Yes.
But this is like saving a person's life.
That's so important. I mean, I'm just like, oh yeah, like the son's fine. But like he was on his deathbed and now he is living again.
Hi everyone, it's Bobby here from the Bible Worm Podcast. If you find yourself listening to this episode thinking, man, I really wish I knew all of this stuff last week, have we got a deal for you. Maybe you're a pastor who wants to work a week ahead on your sermon. Or maybe you're a Bible nerd who wants to show off your Bible knowledge at the water cooler before everyone else has a chance to listen to the episode. Whatever the case, if you'd like to get early access to our episodes, you can join our Patreon at the early worm level or higher. You'll get access to every episode a week before it's available to the general public. You'll also get a truly amazing Bible Worm sticker and the satisfaction of supporting a good cause. Oh, and you'll get ad-free episodes so you won't have to keep listening to messages like this one. Visit patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast for details. As always, thanks for listening to Bible Worm. And now back to this week's episode.
All right, shall we read about another miracle?
Let's do.
Okay. I'm picking up at the beginning of chapter 5. After this, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, there is a pool called in Hebrew Bethesda, which has 5 porticos. In this lay many invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there for a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. For whatever reason, of course, there's an important note here that now we're in Jerusalem.
Yes.
We've gone back to Jerusalem, so we're back sort of in the center of things. We're right by the temple. We don't know what festival this is, as far as I know. Do you know what festival this is?
I don't know. You know, we just saw in chapter 2 that it was Passover, and so maybe Shavuot's Pentecost.
Yeah.
But it's not specified here, so that's purely guesswork, I think.
Yeah, I think what struck me just in that first verse was this may be a dumb thing to have to remember, but like Jesus is a Jew. It's a holiday. It's like saying he went home for Christmas. Like he went to, so it was a holiday. So he went to Jerusalem because that's what Jews
do. That's what you do. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so he's at this scene near the temple. There's a lot of disabled people, invalids who are there, blind, lame, paralyzed. I'm trying to put this into a setting in life now. Like, where in our world can we picture this happening?
That's such a good question. Did you come up with an answer to your question?
I mean, like, my first thought was like, it's an encampment of the homeless community. It's like under a bridge somewhere. It's, but that doesn't have the element of like you are near sacred ground necessarily. It might have an element of, being in a place in a city where people could pass by and maybe would offer you help.
Right.
I don't know if there's a place in the modern world to get both of them, at least in the United States. I don't know, maybe there are places elsewhere.
My head also went to my homeless friends at Canvas Community and other places like that. And, for me, this is abstracting a little bit from the setting, but what is happening here is there are lots and lots of people who have different kinds of infirmities, and it seems like the only option for their health and well-being is this miracle pool that if you're the first one in, it's like luck of the draw. Maybe it's the least disabled person who has the advantage, or if you've got a lot of friends. And then everybody else has no recourse for healthcare. And like when I frame it for myself that way, I'm like, that sounds exactly like our healthcare system, where lots of people who are suffering and they don't have access to healthcare. And, like some people get a GoFundMe that people like they go viral on social media. And so they get help and we're like, oh, wow, look at that social media. But the underlying problem is, we need a better system than everybody
right. Is that you need access to some kind of
a miracle pool. Yeah.
And it is precisely the thing that makes them the most vulnerable or the most in need of help that makes it impossible for them to get, or makes it harder for them to get even to the miracle cure. They're not going to be the first one there. They're not going to be able to, I don't know, whatever it would be in our modern world, have access to the technology that you would need to put things out into the world. And you don't have the access.
And this poor guy, 38 years, we don't really know how old he is. Like maybe he has had this issue his whole life, or maybe we don't know how he came to be unable to walk. Yeah. Whether he was born this way, or whether he had some kind of injury, or whether he was in the military service and was injured in battle. We don't really know. And so we're left to kind of imagine, but 38 years is a lifetime.
Right. This is the life that he has really known.
Yeah.
Bobby, you mentioned before, you referred to this lightheartedly as a miracle pool.
Yeah.
Tell me what you think this pool is. I mean, it says something about the water being stirred, but it doesn't tell us what the pool, it doesn't tell us a whole lot.
If you follow the footnotes, at least in the CEB, you will read, I don't know if you noticed, but we go from verse 3 to verse 5. And in some manuscripts, there is a verse 4 that says, sometimes an angel would come down to the pool and stir up the water. Then the first one going into the water after it had been stirred up was cured of any sickness. That was not in the NRSV that you read.
That was not in the NRSV, no.
Yeah. It's the note I have says critical editions do not include this, which I assume means the manuscript evidence for it is not particularly compelling. But I think some scribes along the way maybe were asking the same question you're asking, which was like, what is it about this pool? And that was at least one answer that the ancient witnesses gave was an angel comes down and does this.
It's interesting. Before I did read that in my footnotes, but before I read the footnotes, I was really just reading it as sort of like a human dignity thing, like being able to bathe.
Oh, yeah.
But if you can never bathe, because people always, then it's a different scale. It's a different scale, but it's I don't know, poignant in a different way, I guess.
It points in a very different way that's kind of digging deep in me a little bit.
Yeah.
Like the pool is there and accessible, but
you can never get to it.
Reasons you can never.
Yeah.
That takes away a little bit. Like I was doing, like it's sort of like winning the lottery. Like when you read it the way you were reading it, that's not it at all. It's just about the capacity and the lack of friends that you have.
Right, exactly. And that's what is so, when Jesus says, do you want to get well? I guess when I wasn't thinking about it as a miracle pool, but just as a pool of water, his response is really interesting. He could just say, yes, I want to get well. But what he says is, I have no one to help me, like do this most basic thing. Like I can't even wash. Like I can't get down to the water because someone always pushes in front of me. It's not, again, if you take out the angel reading, it's not just that someone else gets in first, it's that someone constantly gets in front of me.
Yes.
And so there's never a window. We're not waiting in line and everyone gets a turn eventually. I never get a turn. Which is really heartbreaking.
Amy, I was so interested in like the way that you chose to intone Jesus's question. Because it's not given to us. And the reason I noticed it is because when I read this text with the Bible Worm Collaborative, our monthly Zoom gathering with pastors from around the country, the person reading it said, do you want to get well? which is interesting. Like, and I could hear,
It's
but
like,
like
are you
yours was
even
like
trying?
compassionate and gentle. And this one is like, what is your problem, man? And it's like, I hear people ask people who have long-term disabilities. I hear them ask, especially living on the street, ask them that question both of those ways. Like, do you want to get well? And can I help you? And like, do you even want to get well, man?
Yeah.
And so I was just interested in that choice that you made.
I've felt that a lot in this whole reading today, is trying to figure out how to intone
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Even the thing he says at the end of this little section we read, like, pick up your mat and walk, get up.
Yeah.
And I looked at 2 different translations, and one of them has an exclamation point after get up.
Yeah.
And so it really is sort of like, get up. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I had to keep kind of softening my heart to be like, no, Jesus is not yelling at the invalid.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe Jesus is yelling at the invalid, but.
It's so interesting, the question you were asking about, why is he sitting there and he can't get into the pool? And why does he not say yes? But he explains why he hasn't yet. You can read that as making excuses. I think some people read it that way. It is possible to do a very kind of negative reading of this character as somebody who has sort of given up. But even if you want to read him as somebody who's given up, to me, if you place that in the context of the system in which he lives, so that, he's by the pool. There was a moment, at least, when he thought healing was possible for him. And the system in which he lives has meant that he has never been healed in 38 years. And at some point in there, you must just realize it's never going to happen.
Yes.
And so the wanting to becomes painful.
Yes.
And so you just accept this is my life. And some people can do that. They accept it in a way that is empowering for them. And some people like concede to it in a way that is disempowering for them. I tend to read this guy that way. It's like a lot of my friends who are homeless and, just problem after problem after problem hits them and they finally just say, this is my lot in life,
Yeah.
And so I tend to read him a little bit that way, as he's not making excuses. He's just saying, this is the way that it is. This is a terrible system. And I do not have the resources that I need. And so I've just made my peace with it.
Yeah. Can you imagine every day being next to this miracle pool?
Oh my gosh.
But you can never get in it.
And watching other people.
Constantly get in it. You really, it does something to your spirit. And I feel, I think I would need to put some protections in place and kind of stop hoping, striving, I just can't imagine the physical and emotional exhaustion of that every day.
Yeah. And what you were saying before was making me think, you could imagine that the people who'd been around this pool forever and seen this guy there for 38 years could have decided on this day, what's more important than me getting in that pool is us helping that guy get in that pool. And it is fully possible that people could have made a choice to put his needs before their own, knowing that tomorrow they could get in the pool.
Yeah.
And yet they, like his community, his system and his community have really let him down.
I think this is really a dumb thing I'm going to say, but I just keep thinking it. So I'm just going to say the dumb thing. I keep thinking about like traffic situations where it's like there's one direction that doesn't have the right of way, but because like the main street, it's a different group of cars always that are going through. And so there's no one who comes up to it and is like, oh, I should let the other direction go.
Yeah.
Because it's always a different, it's not like one car is refusing to let them in over and over and over again. It's that every car is refusing once.
Yes.
But it's just, there's nothing in the system that's going to ever change it up. And so everyone just makes that one singular decision for themselves over and over again. But that means there's a whole traffic direction that never gets to go.
I was thinking the other day, I don't quite know why. I was driving down the road and I was like, the best way to get to know what a person really cares about is to see them drive. And like, if you want to know what kind of a person somebody is, not just like, can they, like, do they speed or whatever, but like, are they thinking about the well-being of the driving community?
The well-being of the driving community. And how do they handle people who are not well-behaved on the road? And my sister, who lives in New York, always thinks it's insane that in my little Atlanta neighborhood, you would like wave at someone. If you're walking, you would wave at them if they were driving. And she was like, you can't wave through a windshield. Like, that is an impermeable boundary. Yeah. No.
Do you ever do this thing? Like, there are some windshields that when you look at them from outside, you can't actually see who's in the car. And I'm always like, I don't know if I should wave or not wave, because maybe I know that person and they're going to think I'm rude if I don't wave. But it's also possible I could just be like waving randomly. I do this like it's at work at Hendrix, and someone will drive by in the parking lot, and I'm like, well, I don't know if I know you or not. Yeah. I guess you just wave at everybody, then that solves that problem.
Remember when I waved at your roommate because I thought they were
he was trying to swat a fly in the window.
A fly, and I thought he was waving at me.
So
you're
like,
waved
hi.
back.
It was the first time you'd ever met him.
Yeah. Oh,
that was early on in our knowing each other.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was after my car's engine caught on fire, and I was having to walk to 2.5 miles to Emory every day.
That's right.
And you, who had only known me for like a week, in the graciousness of your heart, come by and pick me up and take me to class.
And wave to your roommate. Yeah.
And wave to my roommate accidentally.
Okay, I think this is my last question for this section. How do you intone Jesus' last comment, this direction to get up and carry his mat?
I intone it as like enthusiastic. Like, get up, pick up your mat and walk. Like, now's your time, man. How do you intone it, or else how would you imagine intoning it otherwise?
I mean, what I'm trying to press against, I guess I keep sort of wishing that there were a little more like softness or a statement of blessing or compassion or something like that. All of those things are in the act of healing.
Yeah.
But the comment is just like, stand up, take your mat and walk. Like, and I'm struggling a little bit with reading it with a kind of harsh tone. But that would be, or like annoyed.
Yeah.
But I don't think that makes sense in this case because he didn't ask Jesus for anything. Jesus stopped to talk to him.
That's right. And he didn't even say he wanted to be healed.
Right.
Jesus asked him and he said, this is why I haven't been healed.
Right.
And then Jesus, yes.
And the way that Jesus announces the healing is like specifically connected to the kind of pain that he has mentioned. Like, I can't walk. And so I can't. I mean, it is also, this is like the general healing of the ailment that he has. But I feel like the fact that what he mentioned is that he needs help getting into the water and he can't, so he can't pursue this healing himself. I don't know. Maybe that's I don't know how else that would have gone down. So maybe it was an obvious way for it to go. But Jesus doesn't say you're healed.
That is true, Amy. I had not really put that together for myself, but this is yet still another miracle where you don't actually know when the miracle happens. It's just like, now he can walk. And so we keep seeing that, like, now your son's going to live. Get up and walk. It's like, we don't see that moment where Jesus blesses or touches or invokes or does anything.
Yeah.
One of the things that I do think is important in this text is that this person has done nothing in particular to warrant being healed by Jesus. He hasn't asked for help. We don't know why Jesus picks him out. I mean, I would guess it's because he's been there for 38 years and Jesus can kind of recognize him as like chronically in this situation. But he hasn't sought out Jesus like the royal official did in the last text. He hasn't asked for anything. And so it sort of separates the like deservingness or the askingness or there's no criteria here, at least that are apparent to me. Jesus just does this because he wants the man to be healed.
Yeah. All right. Are you ready to move on to our last section?
I am.
Okay, so I am picking up in the middle of verse 9. Now that day was a Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been cured, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your mat." But he answered them, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Take up your mat and walk.'" They asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Take it up and walk'?" Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had disappeared in the crowd that was there. Later Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have been made well. Do not sin anymore, so nothing worse happens to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. Therefore the Jews started persecuting Jesus because he was doing such things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is still working, and I also am working." For this reason, the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because he was not only breaking the Sabbath, but was also calling God his own Father, thereby making himself equal to God. It's so interesting to me that this sort of like big question that ends in they're seeking to kill Jesus starts with them telling this guy he should put down his mat.
Yes.
And instead of putting down his mat, he says, "Well, someone told me to pick up my mat."
Yeah.
And it still is not, when the man who's been healed says, "The man who made me well said, 'Pick up your mat and walk,'" the authorities who ask him say, "Who is it who told you to pick it up and walk?" They still don't say, "What do you mean the man who made you well?"
Right. Yeah.
Like, why? What do you make of this sort of like strange level of interest with the mat?
I love the way you asked that question. Here when we're talking about the Jews, John uses that term as we've discussed in different ways, but here it seems to be the establishment religious leaders. And so when we sort of process that into our own sort of time and place, we would want to think about who are establishment religious leaders in our own imagination. And that's who we're talking about. One of the things that occurs to me here is we have been talking about, and, I don't know how we end up reading that text way back in chapter 1 about Nathanael and like, how did Jesus know that Nathanael was an honest person or whatever. But one of the possibilities that you and I had raised is that Jesus is in the community paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
And here, Jesus shows up at this pool and he pays attention and he finds the person who's been there for 38 years.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have the religious leaders who I assume are in this area all of the time. And they don't seem to understand who this guy is. Right? If you've been paying attention and you see that guy that's been there for 38 years walking around with his mat, you would say, "Oh my goodness.
What happened?"
So they are not paying attention to their community. What they are paying attention to is we have a rule, and that rule is don't pick up your mat on the Sabbath. And you're exactly right. When he says, "The man who made me well," and all they hear is, he said, "Pick up your mat and walk." And he should not have said that. So it's a little bit of a caricature.
Yeah.
But also you can kind of hear, like, sometimes establishment people are like this, right?
Yes.
We have rules for the way society should work and the way we should behave. And that's what we care about.
Yeah. And it's a very visible thing that he's doing.
Yes.
And so, potentially, quote unquote, contagious in that way. If people see him walking around carrying a mat, then maybe someone else would be like, "Oh, I thought we couldn't do that, but I guess we can because he is, so we're going to do it." But you're right. It is totally missing the much more important, somewhat, invisible to the religious leaders, fact that this man didn't used to be able to walk.
Right.
And that's really should be the headline here.
Like a miracle has happened and we can't see it because of the rule.
I mean, a miracle has happened. And even if they're looking for something to be grouchy about, you could be grouchy about the miracle happening on Shabbat. It just, it's such a caricature that they're
Yeah, for sure.
that they're obsessed with this mat. So we learn that Jesus had slipped away afterwards. The man didn't know who Jesus was. And so
Right.
like the story could have ended right there.
Yeah.
But I guess it wasn't that Jesus didn't want to be known by him, because he seeks him out later.
Oh, that's true.
And he says this really disturbing thing. Disturbing to me. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you.
Yeah. Why does that bug you, Amy?
Well, Bobby, the idea that we cause our own suffering and disability in particular, but really any kind of suffering by sinning, that hasn't really played out in my life,
Yeah.
in the world that I see. That feels like a way for people who are afraid of whatever suffering they see to tell themselves a story in which that suffering won't happen to them and they can control things
Yeah.
that they can't actually control.
I agree with you about that, Amy. And in fact, next week, spoiler alert, we're going to read a text in which this is exactly the question. There's a man who has been blind since he was born, and the people ask Jesus, was it something he did or something his parents did?
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus says, what are you talking about? Right? This has nothing to do with anything.
Interesting.
And so at some level, the Jesus of the Gospel of John
Yes.
100% agrees with you.
Yeah.
But right here,
But
he
right
seems
here,
to say
there's
something
else
that
going
cuts the other way.
on. Is there another way to read this that you know of?
Here's the way that I read it, which I don't know is a great way to read it, is we need to think a little bit about what sin means.
Yes.
And in the way that I frame the Gospel of John, sin is ultimately about reliance on the power of the empire, the ways of the world, the flesh, rather than on the goodness of God, the light of life, the Spirit. And this man has been relying on the empire's system of miracle pools, winning the lottery, and it has not gone well for him. This person, Jesus, from the other realm has healed him. You know, Jesus did not say, let me pick you up and put you in the pool, right? Let me help you do the thing, the empire solution. He gives him this whole other thing. And so the way that I read don't sin is something has happened that has fundamentally changed the way that you inhabit the world. And if you live in that world, then there is life and fullness. But if you go back to reliance on the empire, that is, if you continue to sin, then the system is not capable of sustaining you. And so something bad's going to happen to you. So depersonalizing it, communalizing it, maybe that's a good way to read it. I don't know.
No, I think that's a fruitful way. I think that's a fruitful way to read it, since we can't just take it out. That's not how this works.
It is so interesting that the man doesn't know who Jesus is, though. Like, I mean, I have never experienced anything like this, obviously. But when you talk to people who've had this kind of life-altering experience, either for the good or for the bad, my impression is often people can remember every detail of the thing that happened to them. Like they remember the face and they remember the voice. And so the fact that this guy can't remember who it was, like looking around the crowd, I don't know who it was, suggests that he's missed something in this interaction. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Like if Jesus's real like impetus driver here is to plant seeds of faith and help people believe, what did the man understand of what had happened? You know, like I feel with the other story, it felt sort of clear that there was a new belief after this.
Yes.
And this one,
it's not said there anywhere.
I'm unsure what he thinks happened and what he believed before and what he believes now.
It seems to me like maybe this, Jesus said in the previous story, unless you see miracles you won't believe. And
Mm-hmm.
and so one way of understanding what that means is like the healing is one thing, the miracle is one thing, but there is like another, it is not the thing.
Yeah. Oh,
The belief
yeah.
is the thing.
Yeah.
And here, the healing is the thing.
Yeah.
And healing for its own sake. And the warning is like, if you just focus on healing for its own sake, you're not going to get what you need out of this. And the man can't quite seem to make that next move.
Mm. Yeah. So like the healing kind of opened a door for something,
Right.
but we're not sure if that other thing
Right.
happened.
The man missed it the first time, and then Jesus went back and found him and was like, hey.
Yeah.
And then we don't really know what happened after that, I guess.
When it says the man went away and told the Jewish leaders, the religious leaders, that it was Jesus, do you read like a negative agenda into that? Or just a sort of, they asked who, I don't know, like is there something sinister happening here? Or just like a lovely naivete?
Some people read him, as like he narked out Jesus or whatever, to the authorities. I don't read it that way. I mean, I see how people get there.
Yeah.
But I just see it as they asked him a question. He didn't know. Now
He
he
didn't
knows.
know, and then later he knew, so.
And maybe he doesn't realize like this is going to get Jesus in trouble or whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't read him as trying to undermine Jesus, but I mean, I think you could read it that way
If you wanted to.
if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Amy, this text is doing something different with Sabbath, I think, than some of the other texts we've read in the Synoptics. I say that for a couple of reasons. One is because John slow rolls that it was the Sabbath all the way down to
He
9b.
sure does. I hadn't even noticed that. He sure does.
In the Synoptic Gospels, that would have been verse 1.
Yeah.
It was the Sabbath and Jesus went looking for someone to heal.
Yeah.
Here it's Jesus healed somebody. Oh, by the way, it was the Sabbath. And then in this verse 17, when they start harassing Jesus, according to CB, because he done things on the Sabbath, he says, my Father is still working and I am working too. And oftentimes I think when you and I have discussed Sabbath healings, where we end up is the Jewish principle that certain kinds of life-saving things are perfectly permissible on the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it becomes a matter of, is the thing that Jesus did a thing that he should have done and that other humans could also do?
Yeah.
But this is not that. This is Jesus saying, my Father works on the Sabbath, so I work on the Sabbath too, which just sounds different. Can you help me think through that?
I mean, I can try. I will tell you, when I read just even the first part of that verse, my father works on the Sabbath. I was like, does God, like, what does that even mean? If we go back to the story of creation, like, precisely not. That is the whole origin of the Sabbath, is that God rested. So there's this question of, does God rest in any way on the Sabbath going forward, or was it just that one Sabbath?
Right.
And I don't think that's a question I had ever entertained, really.
Some of the commentaries I were reading were pointing to exactly that, and they were referring to a tradition in Jewish thought, which I did not know, that was exactly what you just said. God rested on the Sabbath as a model for human beings. And then on subsequent Sabbaths, God continues to do at least certain kinds of work, like sustaining life and those kinds of things, the fundamentals of what it means to be God. And so then if you follow that line of thinking, then I think where you end up with this text is God is the one who is allowed to work on the Sabbath because God must work to sustain life through the Sabbath. And so when Jesus does it, he is saying, that's
me.
The reason I can do it is because I'm God and I can do it.
Yeah.
Does that sound right to you? Or
I mean, I've heard, yes, that like Philo reports that, like, well, if plants continue to grow and babies continue to be born, then God must be doing some stuff on the Sabbath.
So the way you said that made me think this is a tradition that's out there in the Jewish world, but maybe it's not.
I was unfamiliar with it until I was reading the commentary on this verse.
Yeah.
But again, I hadn't thought a lot about the question about what God does and doesn't do on the Sabbath as opposed to other days. Like I don't know. I've never thought about that.
To the credit might be a weird word, but of the Jewish leaders, like if that's what Jesus is saying, and it seems to be, like that is kind of blasphemy.
It's a big
one. If you're not convinced that Jesus is in fact the Word incarnate, which the Gospel of John is convinced about that.
Right.
But if someone walked into my congregation and was like,
but the religious, right, exactly. Like, well, God, you can pick any number of violent consequences that God may carry out in the biblical text. And like, we wouldn't want someone to start claiming that, well, my father does this, so I'm going to do it. Like, now this is a different, this is sort of the flip side of that coin. This is an act of healing and not an act of violence. But if the principle is you can't just claim that you have some special lineage from God, and that means you can do whatever God does, from the perspective of the religious authorities in that community, that'd be a problem.
In the synoptic versions of these kinds of stories, I've always been pretty comfortable with like what Jesus is doing here is redirecting us a little bit to say like, loosen up just a little bit and thinking about the kinds of life-giving you can do on the Sabbath. And I'm going to do that, says Jesus, and you can do that too, and we're all good. And that seems good to me. But this claim is like a whole different order of magnitude in ways. I mean, it totally resonant with the Gospel of John and Christian thought, but this is not an easy thing it's not a minor tweak that Jesus has made to Sabbath practice. It is a dramatic claim he has made about his identity.
It is, I wondered maybe like less than 100 years after this text, there was liturgy out in the world that in the Jewish community that refers to God as our Father, Avinu. And I wonder if there's ambiguity, if there would have been ambiguity in Jesus's audience about whether he means like my father more than your father. I guess he could have said our Father, and then that would have made it a little less.
It's so interesting because the part I'm responding to is actually less than my father and more that I am still working too. Because
interesting.
God is the one who is allowed to work on the Sabbath. And so Jesus is saying, I'm allowed to do that work also. Maybe Jesus is saying that you and I are also allowed to work on the Sabbath, like including us in there. I don't really think so. I think Jesus
I don't really
is saying,
think so either. Yeah, it's claiming an exceptional.
So the my father contextualized within because God can do it, I can do it. Those two things together are what make this a dramatic claim.
Okay, I have one last question.
Okay.
It may be one that we just don't have an answer to. But I keep circling back to this. Jesus slipped through the crowd so the man couldn't see who had healed him or whatever, and then seeks him out later. And this is and this winds up being really bad for Jesus that that the authorities find out sort of who it is who is doing these things, but also maybe really good for Jesus because his name is getting out. And, Jesus's goal is not to live into his 80s. Like that's not his, that's not his goal. So, I mean, the question in my head is, did this go the way that it was supposed to go? But I don't know what to do with that question. Like, did Jesus intend to get the attention of the authorities? Or is that just not, is that not how you think about?
That's a good question. I don't read this as Jesus wanted to get the attention of the authorities. Although Jesus often does in the synoptic versions of stories like this exactly want to get the attention of the authorities. I read it as Jesus healed the man. And the problem with this healing is get up and walk means the man just gets up and walks off. And so they didn't get to close the loop.
That's funny. It worked too well.
And so Jesus is like, wait, there's one more step here, which is not just like, don't just walk off being glad that you can walk now, but recognize what has happened and how it has happened and turn your focus in a different direction than it has been. And Jesus didn't get to say that part. So he seeks the guy out to say that part, and that's what leads to all this other stuff.
Yeah, I think you're right that I do have the Synoptic Gospels more in my head, where Jesus is a little bit like baiting.
Trying to pick a fight a little.
Yeah, but less so here. Oh, Bobby, what do these stories hold for you today in this moment? How would you want to speak to them?
The story that's really resonating with me today is this story we've just been talking about in chapter 5. And I sort of have gestured to this a couple of times along the way, but what it's making me think about is the system of healthcare that we currently live in, especially where you and I are in the United States, and that there really is a whole class of people whose health and well-being is always on the edge, and their access to healthcare is kind of a miracle and not reliable. And they're waiting on some kind of extraordinary something to make them whole again. And, part of what I think this text is doing is just showing the brokenness of the system that was the Roman Empire, in which this is the way people who are in need of healthcare got healthcare. And to say this is not a way that you can profitably run a community. And then, maybe the same thing applies to us. What the religious leaders in this text seem to be doing is, they're around, but they don't recognize the people. They're not invested in the community. They don't know, that guy's been here 38 years. Not, let alone just to notice when he can walk again, but how much more so to be like, hey, we could help you into the pool,
Right. Right. We've been watching this traffic jam for 38 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the religious leaders, that are the establishment religious leaders, are not doing what they need to do within the system. And so you get Jesus, who comes as this outsider, and he pays attention, and he sees this man, and he says, do you want to be healed? And then he heals him. And I was trying to make the point earlier, he doesn't heal him by plopping him in the imperial pool. He heals him with some access to life and fullness that comes from a whole other realm. Reliance on the empire of heaven, empire of God, not the empire of Rome. And so where this is going for me is, if we as religious leaders, and for my community as Christians, want to see Jesus as a model for how maybe we could enter into the world, I am not, and we are not mostly, as far as I know, miracle workers who can do this kind of thing. But we are people who can go into the world and pay attention to the communities and see where people are getting overlooked by the system and help them in the ways that we can. One of the things I have become increasingly convinced about since January 20th, 2025, when this most recent presidency began, is that one of the mistakes that the church of my experience has made is thinking that the power structure is ultimately reliable for taking care of people. And what we need to do is to make the system work better for people who need it. And I get that. I am that. That has been me. I understand that impulse. But I keep coming back to, Jesus did not build a ramp into the pool, or even help the guy into the pool. He offered him health and wholeness and well-being that came from an entirely different place, not reliant on the power of the empire to make it happen, the established procedures. And so more and more I'm thinking about, what does that mean for us as people of faith and Christians in the world today, to be able to see our communities and offer healing in our communities in ways that come from the unique resources of people of faith, not tweaks to the power structure that is beyond our control. Not to say we give up on public things, but that we can't depend on public things. We have to find ways of offering something. And this thing Jesus says to the man, if you keep sinning, if you keep relying on the system, you're going to end up right back here. that seems more and more like that is right to me. And so to give people a way of saying, here's something else you could rely on, and maybe that could be a better thing for you. It's a huge ask. I don't know how to do it. I'm a Bible scholar, not a public health expert, but it seems to me like we need to start being creative about the kinds of smaller term miracles that we can do that don't rely on the structures that are controlled by someone else.
Oh, Bobby, that is some beautiful Torah. That's really, and what a wild imagination and faith it takes to try to see something beyond, let's make the system work better.
Oh my goodness,
Let's build an on-ramp. Let's tweak things.
Yes.
I mean, I really just have a little bit to add. My thinking is largely along the lines of yours, but yours is more developed than mine. So I'll add just a couple little things in my last thoughts, which is that maybe alongside that wild imagination, or maybe as part of that wild imagination, I imagine that I am not alone in like this awareness of how big and complicated and broken the system is.
Yes.
And I have a natural desire for there to be like fairness and there to be a system, and the problem becomes so overwhelming that it starts to feel like if I can't do something at scale, then what's the point? What's the point? Right. No, I don't do anything. And part of what you were helping me to see in particular was like precisely when the system is that broken, that kind of the importance of personal attention and personal relationship, and like this willingness to do for one person what we wish we could do for everybody.
Yes.
And it won't feel like enough, but we also can't give it up if that's the power that we have. There's a line that I was thinking of while you were talking in Proverbs. It's Proverbs 3:27. Do not withhold good from the one who needs it when you have power in your hand to do it. So like whatever little thing you can do, you should do. And my last thought, I think that even when you can't control what happens next, I think part of what I love about the complexity of that second story is that Jesus opens this door for healing, and I don't feel totally sure where the guy lands in the end in terms of his faith or his belief. Like Jesus did a good thing. Yes. And I feel like it would be easy to read it and be like, well, was it worth it? Because it got him in trouble. And did the guy really have faith and start telling other people they should believe in Jesus? I don't know. The text doesn't say that he did. Did he even understand what happened? I don't know.
Yeah.
And you can just get yourself so tied in knots if you're thinking that far down the road. Yeah. We can't control that part. We can only do the good that we have the power to do, and then kind of release the rest of it.
Yeah. I love it. The thing I keep coming back to as you're talking is just, this seems overwhelming, but there are a lot of us who are people of faith and good conscience all over the place. None of us are miracle workers, as far as I know, but we can do small things with the people in front of us. And if enough of us really do it and believe that it is enough for this moment. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Bobby, you have alluded already to the next text we will read. It is John chapter 9, verses 1 through 41, the story of a man born blind. Yes. So I look forward to reading that with you and have really enjoyed reading these with you. And me too. I'll see you next time. All right, Amy. Thanks. I'll see you then. Be well. Bye. Bye. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Bible Worm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us to keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast for details. Bible Worm is produced and edited by Bobby Williamson. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby, and our theme music is The World at Large by Dano Songs. Many thanks to all our Patreon supporters for helping us make this podcast possible.
Join us again next time when we continue on with John chapter 9, verses 1 through 41. Until then, keep on digging.